I get a buzz out of technology. There's no question about that. But I also get a buzz out of doing things differently. So I think, I would say no, not a buzz out of process. Anybody that knows me is I don't follow processes all that well. But if you take process in the general term of new practices, which, Agile's brought in, I think there are just fundamentally better ways of doing work. If you take a look at lean concepts, there's a concept called non-value added, and you always go back and say, where do I take out the non-value added work and the handoffs? If you look at most IT companies, if you go through and do a lean assessment of your delivery processes, you would find that probably 80% of the work is non-value added, and you've got to find a ways to get that out, because that's the anchor that drives people's initiative down. I think everyone should go home at the end of every week and say 80% of the time I spent was productive at work. They shouldn't go home and say, well, 20% of my time was productive and 80% was a waste of time. Well, I like both. I think you can't. They are tied together. I think you have the three things. You've got people and your people systems. You've got technology, and you've got processes and methods. And those three, you have to adequately assess in your own group which of those do you have strengths in. And in our case, I didn't think we had strengths in all three. I think we did significantly uplift all of them. But I was one. I was pretty good at listening to people to say, where do you think the opportunities are, and we found them. And it was, people like Craig and others would come up and say, yeah, let's use Hudson and Selenium and stuff for integration testing. We can do these things differently, and then I'd go and sniff around, see if it worked, and get excited about it, and go follow it. So you don't have to be an inventor. I think you got to be a good listener. Well, my view is most CIOs, 50% of your cost is in infrastructure. You better understand infrastructure. I don't think most CIOs understand infrastructure very well. I think most CIOs have a good background in application development, but not in infrastructure, and they're tied together. I think it's, and you'll see a lot of opinions that, well, to be a great CIO, you don't have to have a technology background. That's a bunch of bull. That's like saying you can be a good footy coach having never played before or watched a game. You just can't do that. You have to have an ingrained knowledge of it. But you have to be a good business person as well. I've run a small company. I've worked in multiple areas. I worked at Toyota, learned a lot about lean, and worked around the world. So I think everyone is a composite of their background. So mine comes from 4 or 5 different angles. So I got interest in a few different things. The challenge for the first year was getting people's belief systems changed that things can be done materially differently. That we don't have that issue anymore. It is really just a maturity cycle, I'd say, on a scale of 4. And we have a set. We look at a set of practices in Agile, and I forget how many are in. And we came up with an index. What we called an Agile maturity index, and we're rating ourselves, and we're about halfway through. We're probably around a 2 out of 4. So I think it takes sustainability, and you got to get a rhythm and a cadence that's regular, and I think we're getting there. But we're definitely, the fact that we're still using coaches in most areas, and it is still adding value. For every $1 we spend on a coach, we get $10 back, in my opinion. So we're not there yet. I think when we're self-sustainable and we've got critical mass and all the key skills, it'll take a couple years to do that. I think it can be used for anything. Actually, our HR department used it to roll out our e-learning platform. It had nothing to do with technology. The project was, can we line this up and put our storyboard and run the kind of how do we roll out a new education program in iterations? And they actually used the agile practices to do something in HR. It didn't have any technology people involved in it. And I thought. And there's different groups that are using stand-ups, there's different groups that are using showcases, but I think it be used a lot more extensively in the business, and I think that will be something we'll continue to push, because we probably haven't done as good a job of pushing it as much because we've had so much on our plate and getting mature at it, and you don't want to go and push something you yourself aren't aren't mature at, but we're getting to that point now. No, we don't. I mean, we have a central PMO that has 2 people in it, and their job is to put some standards around governance and to aggregate, because we're running 4 different businesses. So Suncorp used to have a big thing called, what was it called? CPD, and it didn't work. So we disbanded it and killed it, and they were much too concerned about the governance and standards than they were execution excellence. And my view is if you get a good delivery environment, you get a good cadence and a good delivery excellence, your governance becomes much simpler. And I was talking about that today, even in terms of audit, that sometimes I'll get asked a lot more questions about governance than, is the foundation behind our internet banking or other applications sound, which I think is more important. But typically governance is a signal, and so our key is we want the governance of projects being run at the project level, not centrally. It should be the actual people and the practitioners working on it. Well, each line of business has their own PMO, their PMO office, and they go through their prioritization, and the weighting of which projects do we want to do, how much funding, how much can we do within our existing budgets, how much additional capital is necessary, and they'll go through that and take a look at business benefits and prioritize, and then it goes, really into a concept phase. So that's run at that level, but I think we're actually getting quite efficient, at that as well, as really knowing, what can we do and what makes sense, and try to run more like a product development company that you don't have to. I don't like big projects. I don't like things that go over 6 or 7 months, because I think you lose visibility of what you're really trying to achieve. And you look at the big programs today, you look at big transformation programs, if you can't get your arm. The strategy is hard to execute when it's simple. It's impossible when it's complicated. If you can't understand the strategy or the actual problem you're trying to solve, you won't solve it. So I think we try to break stuff down enough to say, let's go solve this. It doesn't mean everything we run is small projects, but we try to break stuff down into chunks that both the business and us understand that we're solving. What we find out, in my view, is the less people on a project that works better, and you get more clarity of purpose on the problem you're trying to solve. And the fact is we can scale that without scaling the number of people. And the number of initiatives we've done in the past year is quite extraordinary. Well, I think every project has to worry about the ecosystem of the systems that they have to connect to. I mean, we've got big legacy environments. But what we've tried to do, we take a look at banking. We said we were spending incrementally every time we go and do a project. We spent a lot of time, roughly 4 months, to build a new web service, and we do it independently. And we said, well, how about we spend 6 months and build kind of a web layer, on top of our back-end banking system, which is Hogan, so that every time we go to build a new web service, it takes us a week, and we're not rebuilding that thinking. So we did some investment on how to kind of make, even though we know, I think you have to accept what you have, because people say, oh, we can't do these things, we got big back-end systems. I think, you can't use that as an excuse for not making dramatic improvements. So we spent the time to build that. We spent a lot of time building an entire regression testing environment for our banking systems, and we took our cycle time out of testing our branch network applications from 3 weeks to less than a day. 3 weeks with 5 people to less than a day with half a person. And I think you take time out. You find how to take time out. You see where the big sticking point is. And I think what we saw in testing was a lot of time, because you always have lots of systems, and we're not ever going to get over that, not in a short time. So if that's the issue, let's solve the problem. And we really are attacking automated regression and integration testing.